This series is sponsored by Linode. Linode provides virtual servers that make it easy and affordable to host your own app, site or project in the cloud. Whether you're a Linux power user or just a beginner, you can use Linode. You can start from scratch and fully customize your server for any application, or use Linode's one-click apps to deploy game servers, WordPress websites, personal VPNs and much more. You can even upload and run your own image. You can get $20 free on your new Linode account with the code HackerSploit20 or by clicking the link in the description. That is linode.com/HackerSploit. Hey guys, in this video we're going to be taking a look at SSH brute force protection with Fail2Ban. Now before we actually get started with setting it up, let's get a bit of an understanding as to what this tool is and how we can use it for SSH brute force protection. Alright, so what is Fail2Ban? Fail2Ban is an intrusion prevention framework that's written in Python and that protects Linux systems and servers from brute force attacks. Now these are not limited to SSH, but the scope of this video is going to be based around SSH as the primary service that is going to be protected from brute force attacks. Alright, so it allows you to monitor the strength and the frequency of attacks, and then from that you can sort of create various jails that you can use, and you can sort of customize the strength of the defense you want to set up based on the attacks you're getting. And of course, Fail2Ban can be set up to block IP addresses automatically based on specific parameters, more of which I'll explain as we move along. Alright, so the great thing about Fail2Ban is that it automates the process of protecting your server or your SSH from brute force attacks. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, now that we have an understanding of what Fail2Ban is and how we can use it to protect our servers from brute force attacks on SSH, let's take a look at the infrastructure we'll be using in this video. So for the purpose of this video, I've just set up a quick server here with Linode, and I'll just copy the IP address. It's just a simple Ubuntu server, and that'll demonstrate how powerful Fail2Ban actually is. So I'll just open up a terminal here, and we can try and log into this server right now. I haven't set any other user account, so we'll be logging in as the root user. And let me just enter the password here, and that should log us in immediately. So the first thing I want to do is I want to update the packages, because we do need to install Fail2Ban. All right, so I'm just going to say apt-get update here, and we do need to run sudo there because we're already using the root user. But in any case, let's just update the packages here, or the repositories, sorry, not our packages. Now, Fail2Ban is completely free to use, and you can install it through most of your popular package managers. In our case, we're just going to use the aptitude package manager. So it's a apt-get install, and we're going to say Fail2Ban, and we hit enter, and that is going to prompt us to download about 18.7 megabytes, and we're just going to let that install. This shouldn't take too much time, and we can see we do have a symlink created here. That's very important for the Fail2Ban service. So one of the first things we need to do is we need to ensure that we have enabled Fail2Ban to run on system startup. So in the event you do reboot your server, you need to make sure that Fail2Ban runs directly on the startup or during the startup. So to do this, we'll use a systemd, so system control, and we'll say enable. Of course, we're going to say Fail2Ban, and the service is actually called Fail2Ban.service. So we're going to hit enter. And as you can see, it's going to say synchronizing the state of the Fail2Ban service with the sysv service script, so regardless of whether we used systemd. What we can do now is we can start taking a look at the configuration files. Right now, the configuration files for Fail2Ban are going to be found in the etc directory. So we can say let's just list all the files, etc Fail2Ban, and we hit enter. And let's take a look at these configuration files. So the most important one that you want to be familiar with are going to be the jail.conf file and the Fail2Ban.conf file. The Fail2Ban.conf file is a file we'll not be taking a look at in this video, but we're taking a look at the actual jail.configuration file. Now, a fairly frequent or common term that you'll be hearing that you'll hear being mentioned when talking about Fail2Ban is the use of jails. All right, so what is a jail in Fail2Ban? Well, a jail is essentially a configuration file that contains filters or arguments that protect your system or a particular service. Now, by default, all your jails for particular services are going to be in the jail.conf file. All right, so if I just cat the contents, or let's actually view the entire file, we can say Let me move into the directory so it's much easier for us to work there. So we can say ls, and we say jail.conf, and we hit enter. You can pretty much see that first of all it tells you that this is not the appropriate way of actually creating or modifying the already preset jails. The reason being is this: we should actually create another jail.configuration file with the local extension. So you can see in most of the cases you should not modify this file but provide customizations in the jail.local file. Or you can create separate .conf files under the jail.d directory, something we're not going to be doing because the jail.local file is pretty much the best way of going about it. So what you can do is you can copy this file, and you can make a copy of it. However, the second copy is going to be called jail.local. Within this, it has various jails that protect various services. Now, the first one you can see is going to be the SSHD or the OpenSSH server service, and it's going to be enabled. So a jail has already been configured for this, but you can see that there aren't any protection configuration options that have been set here. So for example, the ban time, the default ban time for all jails on all services, regardless of whether it's SSH or FTP, has been set to 1 hour. Now we can pretty much customize this for particular services, which is what we want to do. So you can use this same configuration file and you can copy it, and use the local extension, and this will essentially set up protection for all of those services. However, in our case, I want to actually create a new jail.local file, and the only service that I'm going to be protecting, or we're going to be configuring, is the OpenSSH server, this SSHD service. So again, all we'll do is we will say we'll use vim here, and we'll say jail.local, and we're going to hit enter. Now, as you already saw within the jail.configuration file, we can essentially we can start working with the services that we want to protect. So again, we do this by specifying their name. So in our case, the OpenSSH server is defined by the SSH daemon here. So we're going to say SSH daemon. And then after this, we're going to start providing the syntax. Now, the first important bit of syntax here is going to be the enabled configuration, or the enabled option. This essentially, means whether this essentially controls whether the jail is enabled or disabled, and the option here we can specify is either true or false, right? And of course that is self-explanatory. Enabled means that the jail or the protection will be enabled, or these particular configurations will be enabled. So for now, let's just keep it at false, because I want to show you a test brute force attack on the server before and after. So what we'll do is we'll just say false, and after this we can then get started with our configurations. Now let me just talk about the various configurations that exist here. So we pretty much need to specify the service, the port, and the filter and the log file that we'll be using. Now let me explain. That sounds like a mouthful, but it's really very simple to understand. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I want to say what's the port. The port is going to be the SSH port, right? So the SSH port here. And after this, we specify the filter that we're looking for. Now, the filter is something very important, right? So let me just open up I'll open up a new tab here, and we can try and authenticate to this server one more time. So I'll just say SSH root, and we'll just authenticate to this server. And the reason being is I want to show you the log file that we're talking about. This is the auth.log file. Now, the auth.log file pretty much stores all the authentication attempts made to the server, whether they were successful or whether they failed. And pretty much you can find this within the, let's just cat the contents of the file. So you can find this within the log directory under etc, and it's called the auth.log file. Now, when I talk about a filter, again, a filter is very simple to understand. We'll just hit enter. For some reason, we don't have this file. We're looking, sorry, this is in the var directory. My apologies. Just getting confused with the etc directory there. So you can see that this gives you it gives you a log here of all the authentication attempts. And when I was talking about the actual filter, so if I say filter, this will essentially mean this is essentially where you say Fail2Ban. I want you to look for this particular filter. In our case, we're looking for the SSH daemon or the SSHD service here. So you can see that, for example, if we take a look at the first SSH daemon log here, we can see that this is the SSH server listening on port 22. And then if we take a look at some authentication attempts, you can see we have an authentication attempt here that tells us accepted password for the root user and the particular IP address here. And this was made through SSH, not a TTY session. So if it can also tell you whether the authentication is done locally or remotely. So that is the filter we're looking for. So we only want to filter for SSH daemon or SSHD logs there. So we then need to specify the location of the log file that we're going to be using. So we say log path is going to be equal to, and we specify the relative directory here. So we're going to say var log and auth.log here. And after this, we can just hit enter, and we can now talk about the security options, right? So the security options are very simple. The first of which is the most important. This is the max retry option, and this is where you specify the number of attempts to be made before an IP address or a user is banned. All right. So to do this, we say max retry. And that's going to be equal to, in our case, we'll just say 3. So the number of so we say the number of attempts to be made before a ban is going to be equal to 3. So if you enter an incorrect password 3 times, you're going to be banned, right? Now we then have the ban time, right? So the ban time is again self-explanatory. This is the number of seconds an IP address will be banned for. Now typically you can set it to an hour, which is primarily going to be 3,600 seconds, or you can specify a day, which is a very good option that many system administrators set. So again, we can just calculate this. So 60 times 60, that pretty much gives us what we're looking for. That's 3,600 multiplied by 24 hours. That's going to be 86,400. So we can say 86,400, and that's typically going to be block any IP addresses that have incorrect authentications, more than three incorrect authentications for an entire day, right? So what we can do is we'll just set it to 3,600, or we can set it to 60 seconds, whatever you feel is appropriate for your server based on the attacks you've been getting. Or you can set a generic one if you're monitoring your server and seeing how many attacks you're typically getting, which I'll show you how to monitor. You can then ignore IP addresses, so you can whitelist IP addresses. So that's done by specifying ignore IP, and then within this you can then specify any IP addresses that you may want to whitelist. If you're a system administrator, it may be wise to enter your IP address here. So you can do that, and I think we can also specify, I've specified ban time. What about find time? So the amount of time between failed login attempts, you can just say find time, or we can actually leave that out because we really don't need that. These options are pretty good. So we can save this file, and we ensured that this jail was disabled. And the reason being is I want to show you what typical failed authentication looks like. So what I'll do is let me just exit from here, and I'll just SSH into this, and I'll enter incorrect passwords. Now typically the max amount of times you're allowed to authenticate incorrectly is 3 times. That's the default one, but I'll explain something interesting here. So for example, actually before I do this, because I do want to block my IP address because it is going to connect to it remotely, let's see if we can actually use proxy chains here. So let me just open up this in ParrotOS, and I'll expand this. Or we can actually use AnonSurf. So let me just use AnonSurf instead of using proxy chains. So we'll just start this. Yes, go ahead. And the reason being is I don't want to actually expose my real IP address here, because when I'll be showing you the IP addresses that were blocked, this will come into play. So what I'll do is I'll just wait for AnonSurf to start before we authenticate to the server, and I'll show you what happens here. So remember, the jail is currently disabled, and SSH protection is currently not active with Fail2Ban. All right, so we are currently anonymized here. So what we'll do is we'll say SSH root at, and we'll hit enter. And we'll say yes, we want to accept the fingerprint, and we'll enter incorrect password. So I can just say password, and again that'll be incorrect. Permission denied. Password, we'll hit enter. Another incorrect password attempt or authentication attempt. Hit enter one more time, And there we are. You can see, so it gives you 3 attempts by default, and then after which you're told permission denied. Let's try this one more time. So we're sort of exceeding the amount of attempts, but remember we haven't enabled the Fail2Ban jail, so we can still try authenticating incorrectly. Say password, and we'll say password. Let's try it a few more times, and there we are. We can still see that after 3 unsuccessful attempts, it essentially disconnects the connection. What I'll do is we'll just close this, and let's restart the service before we actually get started. So again, after writing any changes to your your jail configuration file, you essentially need to restart the Fail2Ban service. So we say system control, system control, and we say restart. We'll say Fail2Ban service, and we hit enter, and that's going to restart it. So now that we've tested that that we currently do not have any brute force protection here, what we can do is we can modify this file, and we can say set this to true. So now we're going to activate the protection. So we're going to say true, and we're going to write changes and exit, and we'll restart the Fail2Ban service. And let me just check the status here. Sorry, that is incorrect. We'll just change this to status, and we can see it's active and running. This is very important because if you do want to actually check if you're having any issues with your syntax or any of the filters you've set up for your particular jail in the jail configuration file, this is where you can actually check if there are any issues. And you also have the log here, so you can see stopped, started, and we're ready again. So we can now get started, and we can test it one more time. So what I'll do is I'll use the same IP address here, and what we'll do is we'll just say SSH root at, and for some reason we're being told the connection was closed by remote host. So let's try a different IP here. So let's see if we can, let's check the status of the Tor service. Remember, we need do we have Tor running? We currently have Tor running, I believe, but I think we still need to disable the anon surf here. We can just stop it. So we'll say stop, and we'll wait for this to stop. And I think we can just use proxy chains now. That would be much better instead of using anon surf. Although I should have done that before, but I just wanted to explain a point here. So anonymous mode has been stopped, and we'll just start Tor. Actually, yeah, we'll just start it, and now let's use proxy chains. So I'll say proxy chains SSH, I'll say root at, and we'll paste the IP in here. All right, so it'll ask us for the password, and I'll just enter an incorrect password. I'll hit enter, and I'll enter an incorrect password again. Remember, we have set the options in the jail configuration file to 3. So again, it will just it'll block the user for the first 3 attempts. Obviously, we aren't getting a response. We can also try brute forcing with Hydra, which is also another option. So let's try this out. So we'll say Hydra we'll say root, and the password list is going to be user share. And we're going to say word lists, and we'll use some of the Metasploit word lists here. Let's see which ones we have. Do we have any SSH ones? Nothing much. We can use the common roots. Let's try that. We can just use any. The bottom line is I just want to show you what this would look like. So we're looking for SSH, and we specify the IP address here. Let's get rid of any other sessions that I had, and let's have some verbose output, and let enter. And you can see it tells us that could not connect to this particular IP, connection refused. What I'll do is you can see that after the 3rd failed attempt, we can see that we get no response, and that actually proves that it's working. However, I'll actually show you how you can check this. So if we just terminate this and we go back onto our server, we can view the logs and the failed authentication attempts and the blocked IPs by taking a look at the Fail2Ban client here. So I can hit enter, and then after this we want to display the status, right? So if I hit status and we hit enter, this will give you the number of jails that you have. And as you can see, we have only one jail, and that is the SSH daemon. So we want to check the status of the SSH daemon, or the SSH server, the open SSH server jail, and we hit enter. All right, and you can see that the status for the jail is as follows. So the filter is the currently failed is 0. The total amount of failed authentication attempts is 6. You then have the file list, which is the authentication log that is going through. It's banned 3 IP addresses, so the total amount of banned IPs is 3. You have the banned IPs that I think we used with AnonSurf and also with Tor, and my IP address here, which for some reason it blocked. I think that's because I disabled AnonSurf and Paratos using my IP. In any case, so what we can do now is we can go back into Parrot, and if we take a look at Hydra, we can see that we have a few issues here. So let's test this one more time by running AnonSurf again, and then we'll try and run Hydra with that so that we have a new IP we can work with, because it looked through the Fail2Ban client that it did work. When I'd run proxy chains with Hydra here, because I actually didn't run proxy chains directly. So if I try and do that right now, we can actually do it here. So we can say proxy chains. We'll wait for this to connect first. So we're currently on the AnonSurf terminal, so we can just run it through this. So we hit enter. So it's going to test if possible authentication is supported, and you can see it is working, and immediately we're getting a few connection errors. So it's going to try connecting again, but what we can do is we can say sudo, we'll say proxy chains, and we'll run this with Hydra, right? And I'll enter my password here. So we can see that it's currently supported, and immediately we get authentication errors to the server. So that's working fine. Let's take a look at the Fail2Ban client one more time. So again, I'll just clear that out, and we can run the Fail2Ban client and check the number of failed authentication attempts again. And now you can see that again, the amount of failed authentication attempts has moved up to 38, and currently the total amount of banned IP addresses are as follows. So we have various ones that we had that we got with AnonSurf and proxy chains to a certain extent. So that's pretty much how to view. This is pretty much how to view all the failed authentication attempts and the blocked IPs, which you can then use to build a geographical model of where most of the attacks are coming from, even though they may be coming from a botnet. So again, that's how to use Fail2Ban. So again, if you want to disable a particular jail, we can just check this out here, Fail2Ban, and you can then modify the local configuration file. So we can use vim, and we say jail.local. And we hit enter. So if I'm working with the SSH daemon, I can just disable this to false here, and that will disable the protection. And if I just run an exit, and we can try and restart this service. So I can say system control, and we can say restart. Oops, sorry, restart. Let me just reduce the font size here, and we'll say Fail2Ban service, and we'll hit enter, and there we are. All right, let's take a look at whether we can actually log in now. So I'll say exit, and this is through my local IP. I'm not going to use proxy chains. So I'll say SSH, will actually just SSH without proxy chains, SSH root at this particular IP, and you can see it now works perfectly fine. So if I hit another, some other incorrect passwords, we are now able to at least get authentication attempts across the line. But yeah, that's pretty much all that I wanted to show you guys how to do, with Fail2Ban, how to use Fail2Ban, to protect your server from SSH brute forces. Let me know if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.